The dirt was still loose, staining my knees and my new black suit, when Uncle David leaned down and whispered the words that broke me completely. "She was ashamed of you, Chris. The illness was just an excuse to avoid telling you that." I didn't cry then. Grief had already emptied me, leaving only a hollow space where my heart used to be. But hearing that, a final vicious swipe at my 28 years of devotion to holding Eleanor, my sanity felt together. Like a clean, I looked up, cut tears finally beginning to sting, ready to scream at the vile man who was supposed to be family, when a shadow fell across the granite headstone. "That," a crisp, low voice stated, cutting through the silence of the Phoenix Cemetery, "is a horrifying lie, Mr. David." My uncle, who stood rigidly tall, immediately recoiled, his face shifting from smug cruelty was Maria to Rodriguez, Mom's primary nurse for the last 6 months of her life, wearing simple scrubs. Maria was not supposed to be here. David had told me she had been let go the week before Mom passed, claiming he needed to streamline the medical team to save costs. Before the darkness of Mom's diagnosis, the aggressive pancreatic cancer that took her life in 6 agonizing months, our world in Chandler, Arizona, had been a quiet, meticulous, predictable rhythm, and I worked remotely. Mom was a retired librarian, enjoying our dinners together and our shared love of old movies. Uncle David, her older brother, was a distant, controlling figure who lived across state and only showed up when legal matters or money were involved. Mom always kept him at bay, a fact I now realize was one of the greatest acts of love she ever performed for me. When the cancer hit, everything changed. To full-time caretaker, Mom became weaker. That's when David swooped in. I had to shift from son. He arrived promising support, claiming his business acumen was needed to handle Mom's mounting medical bills and final arrangements. The first signs of trouble were subtle, wrapped in a veneer of concern. He started controlling the visitation schedule. "Eleanor needs rest, Chris," he'd say, pulling me away from her bedside after only 30 minutes. "You look tired, too." Began answering Mom's phone calls and managing her text messages. If I tried to sit with her during the day, he found errands for me, running to the pharmacy, meeting with lawyers he had hired, reviewing financial documents I barely understood. He was systematically isolating me from the one person I needed most. The isolation was painful, but the most alarming change was Mom herself. In the last month, she became withdrawn when David was around. When I brought her favorite lavender sachet, she just held my hand, staring intently at me, her eyes wide with a fear I couldn't place. When David entered the room, she instantly closed her eyes and pretended to sleep. I asked David about it. He just sighed, rubbing his temples. "It's the medication, Chris. She's confused. Doesn't recognize anyone sometimes. Was the one managing the doctors, hard to watch. The bills, the pain. I was drowning in exhaustion and despair. But here, so I accepted by the freshly turned earth, stood Maria, contradicting his narrative with fierce conviction. "Maria," David stammered, recovering quickly and reverting to condescending professionalism. "I thought I made it clear you were dismissed. You have no business disturbing a private family mourning." Worried about you Maria constantly. Ignored him completely. She was desperate to talk to you alone, locked on me. He wouldn't allow it. She pointed a rigid finger at David. Of you. He changed her phone number and intercepted her mail. In the last week, she tried to write you a note, hidden inside a Bible, but he found it. The bottom fell out of my world again, this time with a sickening lurch of recognition. Not shame, but fear. Mum hadn't been withdrawing because of meds. Hadn't been protecting her. She had been trying to signal distress. He had been controlling her. David. "What note?" I demanded, the grief in my chest replaced by a cold, searing anger. David stepped forward, attempting to block Maria. "She's unstable, Chris. Grief makes people say things. Don't listen to this disgruntled employee." Maria took a step back, maintaining eye contact with me, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, yet loud enough to change the power of attorney the week she was diagnosed. He was draining her accounts for medical decisions, but it was all financial. He changed the locks on her safe deposit box. Your mother knew what he was doing, and she was terrified he would destroy your future the moment she was gone. The weight of her words settled heavily, transforming my sorrow into a terrifying resolve. This wasn't just about a cruel lie at a funeral. This was theft as familial
isolation,
duty. And I looked at the man who had pretended to mourn beside me, his tailored suit hiding a predator's greed. The pain was still insufferable, but now it had a target. "You knew exactly what you were doing, didn't you, David?" My voice was low, flat, devoid of emotion which seemed to frighten him more than any scream. "You used her illness as a shield."
"You shouldn't do this here."
Hard, the
"No,"
arrogance finally rising to my
"Let's
feet.
talk about
"We're
this
doing
later,
it right
Chris.
now. Maria, how do you know all this? Do you have proof?" Maria nodded, pulling a small, encrypted thumb drive from her pocket. "I was documenting everything, Chris. Not for me, but for Eleanor. She made me promise. She was fighting for you until her last breath. She knew someone would have to pay for this." David swallowed hard.
"Later, Chris.
The arrogance
We shouldn't
finally
do this here."
cracking. "No,"
Let's
I said,
talk about
finally
this.
rising to my feet. "We're doing it right now. Maria, how do you know all this? Do you have proof?" Maria nodded, pulling a small encrypted thumb drive from her pocket. "I was documenting everything, Chris. Not for me, but for Eleanor. She made me promise. She was fighting for you until her last breath. She knew someone would have to pay for this." David lunged of primal fear. His face,
"Give me
usually
that, you
so
crazy
composed
bitch.
and smooth,
This is
was slander. "I'll sue both of you into the ground, Chris. I swear to God." I stepped between them, my hand instinctively closing around Maria's arm, shielding her. My heart wasn't pounding with fear. It was hammering with a cold, terrifying certainty. This wasn't the reaction of a grieving friend who was being wrongly accused. This was the desperation of a cornered animal, the tearful
all
calls,
those
late-night
offering
visits
support,
to my house, the constant insistence that I needed to let go of Eleanor's memory and move on with the life insurance payout. It wasn't empathy. It was surveillance. David wasn't comforting me. He was making sure his plan was still airtight. He was guarding his investment. "Don't touch her, David," I whispered, my voice dangerously low. The waiter, sensing the seismic
Discreetly
shift
backed
in the
away.
atmosphere at our
"You
table
just
in that
sealed your
upscale
fate.
Scottsdale
Whatever is
bistro.
on
this drive, we are going to see it. Right now." We didn't wait for him to respond. Maria and I grabbed our coats and walked out, leaving David standing by the white tablecloth, sputtering threats and demands. His voice followed us into the parking lot, a pathetic, high-pitched whine that no longer held any power over me. It was the sound of my blindness dissolving. In Tempe, the
We drove to
silence in the
Maria's
car
small
was
apartment
thick,
complex.
punctuated only by the low hum of the AC. I kept glancing at the thumb drive clutched in my hand, a tiny piece of plastic that held the key to my entire shattered world. Inside her apartment, Maria's hands trembled as she plugged the drive into her laptop. Eleanor started noticing things 6 months before the accident, Maria explained, hovering over the screen. To her insurance
Little
policies
discrepancies
that
in the
David
business
insisted
accounts,
were routine
weird
changes.
changes.
And then there was the doctor, Dr. Reynolds. David pushed her to use him for her stress headaches, insisting he was the best in the state. I stared at the screen as the files populated. They weren't just PDFs. There were audio files, encrypted messages, and timestamps. This wasn't a casual suspicion. It was a dedicated investigation by a woman who knew she was being fighting a silent war. Eleanor, my sweet. The drive
Trusting.
contains enough for the police to start investigating the financials, Maria said, pointing to a file detailing large wire transfers from Eleanor's independent trust to an offshore account only David could access. But it doesn't prove David caused the accident. It proves motive. To get definitive proof, we need to know what he's doing right now, scheduled to meet with the executor of Eleanor's estate. The realization the following nauseating force in downtown David Phoenix was to finalize the sale of her share of the architecture firm. If he had fabricated documents or needed to destroy hard evidence, he would do it tonight. He keeps sensitive files in a secondary safe at his home office in Paradise Valley, I said, remembering an offhand comment David had made months ago. Equipment out of a hidden drawer. Tax evasion stuff. A silent sentinel waiting for the signal. Nodded. I have a tiny camera, military grade. We can set it up. We need eyes on that safe, Chris. We need him caught in the act. The next few hours were a blur of adrenaline and surgical precision. We drove back to Paradise Valley under the cloak of midnight. David's sprawling modern house was dark,
second floor,
save for a single light,
pool,
glowing weakly
Maria,
from his
a
home
former
office,
security
tucked away
consultant,
on the moved like a ghost. I boosted her up to the roof overhang near the office window, my hands shaking with a mixture of fear and absolute righteous fury. She returned 10 minutes later, breathless, wiping sweat from her brow. "It's done," mounted high up, pointing directly at his desk and the floor safe. "We have audio and video feed.
Parked
We
blocks
just
away.
need to wait." We watched the grainy, green-tinted night vision feed flicker on the small
Back in
monitor.
the car.
The office was silent, empty. Every ticking second stretched into an eternity. I thought about Eleanor, about the life we had planned. A summer trip to the Grand Canyon, moving to a smaller house, just the two of us. It was all poison now, tainted by the betrayal of a man I had called a friend. Wearing the expensive, slightly stained shirt from the restaurant, door clicked open. He was pacing. David walked in, running a hand through his thinning hair. Still. He checked the window blinds repeatedly, paranoia radiating off the feed. He walked to the large framed abstract painting behind his desk and swung it open, revealing the heavy steel safe. He punched in the code, and the heavy door hissed open. The tension in the car was suffocating. Reached into the safe
Maria held
and pulled
her
out
breath.
a large manila
Her eyes
envelope
locked
and a
on the
small
screen.
sealed vial. David. The envelope looked like it contained official documents, likely the fraudulent estate papers. But the vial was small, clear, and sinister. He placed the vial on the desk. He didn't open the envelope immediately. Instead, he pulled out his phone and made a call, his voice barely a rasp. "Have the hard evidence yet? I had to ditch them at the final batch tonight. Chris knows something, but he doesn't. No one can trace it back to the vehicle. I made sure of that. The dosage was perfect, untraceable in the general autopsy. Just enough to cause the cardiac episode that made her lose control on the 101. My world didn't just stop, it exploded. The air left my lungs in a painful rush. Eleanor hadn't swerved because of a stress headache or poor driving. She had systematically murdered the woman I loved, David, not for a quick payout, but for the complex, long-game seizure of her assets. Maria's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. On the screen, David picked up the small vial again, looking at it with cold, clinical indifference. "I need to burn the rest of the supply," David continued, his voice regaining its oily confidence, chillingly casual. "Prescription is destroyed. The final piece Chris will have nothing but suspicion. Once these documents are gone, connect the specialized toxin to Dr. Reynolds, and the insurance payout is mine. She was so annoying near the end mark, fighting me every step. Honestly, it's a relief she's gone." He laughed, a short, dry, triumphant sound. I didn't hear anything else. The sound of that laugh was the last straw. The betrayal, the deceit, the cold, calculated murder. Live into the darkest hour of the night. It was right there, my vision broadcast. "Get up, Maria," I choked out, grabbing my own phone. My fingers were shaking so violently I almost dropped it. "We're not waiting for morning, we have him." I hit the record button on the screen capture and dialed the number for the Phoenix Police Department. My voice, when I spoke to the dispatcher, wasn't the voice of a grieving widower or a betrayed friend. David was about to pay the ultimate price, unadulterated justice. The voice of the dispatcher, calm and professional, filtered through the receiver, pulling me back from the precipice of pure, consuming rage. I gave her the address, David's address. A quiet ranch house in Mesa where he pretended to mourn the woman he murdered. I explained, succinctly and coldly, that I had evidence of insurance fraud and homicide. "Maria's shoulder, the evidence is stabilizing us both," I stated. "It's a direct confession captured on screen. He thought he was safe. He thought he was relieved." It took 3 agonizing minutes to relay the necessary details. My name, Maria's, the victim's, Sarah, before I hung up. Maria collapsed onto the cheap motel bed, tears finally coming, not of sadness, but of corrosive relief. "Was living the last 6 months," she whispered, under the shadow of suspicion, pretending grief while
It's
actively
done.
hunting the man who sat beside me
hard
at the
part
funeral,
wasn't
his
the
arm
call.
draped around my
The hard
shoulder in a
part.
grotesque display of false empathy. Looking back, the signs were screaming, but I was too blinded by loyalty and pain to see them. David had been my best friend since college, the man who helped me fix the leaky faucet and watched the Super Bowl with me every year.
David I knew
dissolved, but after Sarah's
replaced
death,
by a
smooth, overly attentive stranger. Sarah died 6 months ago. Accidental carbon monoxide poisoning from a supposedly faulty furnace during a cold snap in Phoenix. The official report cleared everyone. David, who ran a small HVAC consultancy, had inspected that unit just a month before. That was the first twitch of doubt. He started visiting daily.
Mount Mark,
always bringing
you
coffee.
should take that trip.
Always
Sarah
asking
always
about the
wanted you to
insurance
take.
policy. It wasn't concern.
Did they pay out
It was
the
auditing.
full?
He wanted confirmation that the final phase of his plan was complete. One evening, about 3 months after the funeral, he came over while Maria was visiting. We were looking through old photos of Sarah, trying to feel something other than numbness. David kept steering the conversation back to the house. He said I should sell it. Maria,
move
somewhere
who
new.
knew
David was usually
clean
emotionally
slate.
stunted, watched him like a hawk. You know, David, Maria said softly, her eyes narrowed. Sarah's old work laptop is still missing. She had all her final architectural drafts on there. I thought you said you helped me pack up the office. David laughed, a brittle, unpleasant sound. Oh, that old thing? Probably boxed up in the garage,
Was
Maria.
meticulous.
Don't worry about
That
gadgets
laptop
now.
wouldn't just vanish.
Worry about Mark.
Maria
was the catalyst, but
Maria
she'd been an
did
analyst
worry.
for a tech firm before
Sarah.
switching careers, and she had a nose for digital trails. She told me, flat out, Mark, he's too happy. He's relieved. He's asking about the money because he needs to know his investment paid off. The idea was nauseating. David, a murderer? It felt like betraying Sarah.
way
To
his
even
eyes
consider it.
avoided
mine, but the whenever image of
the
his
word
unnaturally
accident
calm
was
face at the
used,
memorial
started
started to chip away at my resolve. We decided we needed proof, something irrefutable, because no police officer would reopen a closed case based on a friend's bad vibes. The plan was high risk, morally questionable, and terrifying. Maria remembered that David and Sarah shared an obscure private server years ago for
Managed
a joint
to gain
charity
access
project they
using
briefly
an
ran.
old password.
A
Maria
digital
remembered.
sandbox. The
that had been
server was
forgotten.
mostly empty, but David still used one shared folder for personal backups. Maria prepared the bait, a keylogger disguised as a necessary software update, bundled within a highly appealing file named Sarah's Final Policy Documents. We uploaded it to the shared folder. It was a shot in the dark, hoping his greed would override his caution. I felt like a
The
criminal
next 2 weeks were
hacking into
torture.
my dead wife's friend's
Every time my
computer.
phone buzzed.
We checked the log file obsessively, emails about his failing business, random web searches, nothing incriminating. My guilt grew into a heavy, suffocating blanket. Maybe Maria was wrong. Maybe I was destroying my last friendship out of grief-fueled paranoia. Then came last night. We were sitting in my kitchen, the laptop
the
open
latest
between
log
us,
entries,
preparing to shut the whole
delete the
operation
files.
down. Suddenly
Maria
her breath
scrolled.
hitched. Her hand flew to her mouth, stifling a scream. Mark, look at this, she breathed, pushing the screen toward me. It wasn't an email. It was a chat log, dated the day after Sarah's accident, between David and an unknown contact, labeled only as the Fixer. The conversation was short, brutally transactional. Tricky.
Fixer.
Had to make it look like
Done.
a pressure failure,
Clean.
not tampering.
Payout.
Fixer,
Confirmed.
don't worry. Mark is
David.
too busy grieving.
Good.
The money
The
is
heater
wired to the
was.
offshore account as agreed. Now you can finally cover those debts. David. Relief. Pure relief. My world didn't just stop. It evaporated. That word, relief. It was the same exact word the dispatcher heard me repeat just minutes ago. Only now I was the one filled with an inverted, savage for a cut of the insurance policy that he needed to save his crumbling life. My vision tunneled. Get up, Maria, I choked out, grabbing my own phone. My fingers were shaking so violently I almost dropped it. We're not waiting for morning, we have him. I hit the record button on the screen capture and dialed the number for the Phoenix Police Department. Wasn't the voice of a grieving widower or a betrayed friend. It was the voice of pure, unadulterated justice, and David was about to pay the ultimate price for his relief. The adrenaline that had fueled me for weeks finally deserted my system, leaving behind a hollow, aching vacuum. Sitting in the sterile, fluorescent light of the Phoenix precinct, filling out the detailed harassment and fraud report, I felt less like a victorious investigator,
beside me,
her hand more like heavily on my knee, whispering assurances I barely registered. Detective Miller, a woman whose face held the permanent exhaustion of someone who'd seen humanity at its worst, took notes efficiently. She didn't need to ask if the evidence was conclusive. The raw video footage of David admitting his scheme, laughing about my gullibility, most agonizing grief. He hadn't just been manipulating my finances. I just lay in bed, staring at my deepest, feeling the absolute weight of having eliminated the tumor, only to realize how much reconstructive surgery the remaining body would require. David was arrested 2 days later when he showed up for a supposed business meeting at the cafe where we'd first shared coffee after my wife's funeral. A detail that, upon reflection, twisted the knife pathetic, realizing the phone call I'd made the night before wasn't a threat, but a promise. The next few months were a blur of legal motions, restraining orders, and the horrific process of untangling my life from his poisonous knots. David tried everything, denial claiming the video was edited, painting me as unstable due to grief. But the digital trail, the bank transfers, the encrypted messages Maria and I had uncovered, he had meticulously documented his own downfall. I couldn't face the idea of confronting him in court. The thought of seeing that smirking face, even for a moment, made my stomach clench. My lawyer, a sharp, empathetic woman named Sarah, handled the heavy lifting. I focused on the only thing I could control, rebuilding the wreckage of my mind. The first session with Dr. Elena Morales was excruciating. Therapy. I had to dissect the time counseling, not of my wife's betrayal trauma, but of David's infiltration. I had to face the horrifying truth. The man I trusted to help me mourn was actively cheering on my deterioration, seeing it as a financial opportunity. "You need to forgive yourself for being human, Robert," Dr. Morales said gently one afternoon, 6 months into our sessions. "Grief makes us vulnerable. It's a sickness." David didn't target your weakness. Her words were the first true harm. I had spent so long blaming my own stupidity, my blindness, my desperate need for connection. Slowly, painfully, I started recognizing the subtle signs of gaslighting, the small manipulations that had made me doubt my own intuition. Maria was my anchor throughout this process. She didn't preach or judge. She just brought me coffee, shared investigation, and listened to the ugly, became one of the most honest things of doubt left in my life. Our friendship forged in. The final verdict came down in November, nearly a year after the discovery. David Sullivan pleaded guilty to several counts of felony fraud and aggravated emotional abuse in exchange for a lighter sentence. The judge, clearly influenced by the predatory nature of the crime, exploiting a recent widower, sentenced him to 5 years in state prison. His incarceration didn't magically restore my money or erase the psychological scars, but it did provide an absolute closure. It was the definitive statement that what he did was not just unethical, but criminal. The system, which often feels distant and cold, had recognized the gravity of psychological devastation. I sold the house in Phoenix soon after. California, a place where the air was echoing in the hallways, and the horizon was vast. I moved to a quiet coastal town. I started volunteering at an animal shelter, finding a quiet, non-judgmental comfort in the company of creatures who asked only for kindness. The grief for my wife, Sarah, still existed, but it was cleaner now. It was untainted by the venomous shadow of David's betrayal. I could finally remember her smile, delicate architecture, the lies built on the foundations of trust. Afterward, when those foundations are deliberately weakened by someone you love, the collapse is total. But here is the truth I carry now. The collapse is not the end of the story. It is merely the end of the old story. If you're reading this, listening to this, and there is a tiny, nagging voice in the back of your mind, a thread of doubt about someone close to you who seems too involved, please listen to that voice. Do not dismiss it as paranoia or sadness. A truly good person offers comfort. They do not seek control. Sometimes the person praying for your downfall isn't a shadowy figure in the distance. They are the one sharing your dinner table, the one you invited into your darkest hour. If you feel manipulated, if the math isn't adding up, trust your instincts. Because the price of ignoring the truth is often far higher than the pain of facing it. After the wreckage, I am learning how to live again. Not just surviving, but truly living. Free.